Okay, so good morning everyone. My name is Grace Mulcahy and I work with the Research Culture team in UCD. I'd just like to echo the remarks of Professor Campbell there that we're so excited to be able to launch this all-island Research Culture Network today. And really delighted to see that we have a full house here, and I know we're going to have a really fascinating day and interesting and stimulating discussions and conversations. Above all, it's my great privilege to introduce this morning Ros Attenborough from the Wellcome Trust, from Wellcome in London. And again, the reason we're all here is because Wellcome was inspired to start up their institutional fund for research culture. We're lucky that we were able to benefit on the island of Ireland as well as our colleagues in Great Britain from this fund. And indeed, the network that has been mentioned is one of the things that Queen's and UCD have chosen to spend some of the funding on in this. So Wellcome, I think, as many of you here in this room will know, have been at the forefront of starting and stimulating conversations about the importance of research culture, enabling both the integrity of research and the excellence of research, and allowing us as researchers to do that research in an environment which is supportive of our mental health and well-being as well. So without further ado, Ros, please come up to the podium here. Ros is a research culture and community specialist at Wellcome, and she's going to tell us about Wellcome and its approach to research culture and the Institutional Fund for Research Culture as well. So please give Ros a warm welcome here today.
Thank you so much, and thank you for such wonderful, welcoming introductions. It's absolutely lovely to be here in Waterford, to be in this room, and thank you so much to the organisers of this conference. I know it takes a lot of work. I'm trying to organise something similar at the moment, and thanks to our hosts here at SETU. That's wonderful. As these very kind introductions have mentioned, my name is Ros Attenborough. I'm a research culture and communities specialist at the Wellcome Trust. And I have quite a generous slot here to chat to you, and I've tried to include a bit of interaction in that. I hope it's not going to be too awkward for you. What I'm going to talk about is quite a broad introduction to what we do at Wellcome in my team, but then explain the institutional funding that we've been involved in at Wellcome. Just to make it a bit personal, put some faces to names. This is the quite small team that I work in, although I guess quite a generous team for people working specifically on research culture. Myself and my colleagues Sonia and Faith are the three research culture and community specialists in the team, and we all work on different projects. Quite a lot of our work is internal facing to Wellcome, and Shamari is our manager in that area. Don't worry about taking in all the detail here, but I'm including this slide just because I had a few conversations last night with people indicating they may have had, they'll meet different people in different parts of this team. This is the overarching team that I'm part of. So research culture and communities, you can see, fits into the overall research environment team at Wellcome, where we also have colleagues working on open research, bioethics, social research on research, and engaged research. And we, as a team, this is the sort of diagram that explains how we relate to the rest of the organisation. So this may not mean a lot initially, but the sort of funding schemes are at the top and in the middle, so the discovery research is the big set of sort of basic research that Wellcome funds, the regular funding schemes, and then there are the challenge areas, in particular areas of human health, over at the top. So there are big teams that work in those areas. You can see research environment down in the bottom there. We are a so-called cross-cutting function to those. So we sometimes are sort of internal consultants trying to improve the way that Wellcome funds in our own practices and advise our colleagues on that. Because lots of Wellcome, we are part of the research system, and a lot of our business as usual is part of the issues that we're trying to address in research culture. So we have this really interesting insight role where we're not really grant funders ourselves, except in the capacity where we do have a specific research culture funding scheme, which I'll get onto in a moment. So the research environment team has 3 values that research Wellcome supports is strengthened by being ethical, open and engaged. that the people Wellcome funds thrive in equitable, diverse and supportive cultures, and that Wellcome is known as an innovative, efficient and inclusive partner and organisation. And I just want to highlight the middle one of those, the one that's about people, because that's really where my team focuses. We're thinking about not just researchers, but all the people of research, and thinking about how, when they can thrive, research can thrive and broader society can thrive. Okay, so now I'm going to be slightly experimental. This bit is not going to work directly from the presentation, but given I do have a generous slot here, I wondered if we could interact a bit. If you do have a phone on you, I would love to know who we have in the room today. I know there's a real diversity of roles in research and in the academic ecosystem, and it's always different which crowds I'm in the room with. So if you go to menti.com and if you can see that number at the top and type it in, it will give the option for you to give some words or phrases that describe. Doesn't have to be your job title. It could be whatever identity you're coming to the room with. And if we see, yes, it's starting to work. Thank you. It's already going to start to become a bit small now because we've got so many people in the room. But thank you so much. This is really interesting. We're seeing strategy, we're seeing postgraduate students, librarians, managers of different types. Ethics is quite big here. Wonderful. I can share this with you later if you want. This is an interesting insight. People in different research areas. President, I'm seeing Vice President. Lovely. Does anyone want some more time? We good? I think we could keep on adding here, but I don't want to sort of focus too long if you're struggling to connect. So I do have one more of these now at the moment. So this is an incredibly basic question in a way. What comes to mind when you think about research culture? I like to ask this, we've possibly moved past the stage in a lot of research culture conversations of saying, what is it? But this probably comes from my social studies of science background. I'm really interested in with such a broad umbrella term, we all come to it differently. Every single time we come to it differently, and we want to kind of define it differently based on the backgrounds we come from to it. But I think it's really important to acknowledge that diversity and also the fact that these things tend to be connected as it's a systemic issue, not just a random set of collection of terms. Confusion is featuring strongly. Collaboration, integrity at the centre there. Thank you so much. It's a wonderful set of contributions. Nurturing environment. I'm seeing lots of lovely phrases. Thank you. I'll come away from that for a second now. Back into my presentation. So this is, again, quite basic, but for the purpose of clarity, at Wellcome we usually end up going to the Royal Society definition of research culture just because it's quite broad. Research culture encompasses the behaviours, values, expectations, attitudes and norms of our research communities. It's a catch-all. It's useful to have something this broad, but I did want to do that exercise before just to say that I think we should remain open to different ways of conceptualising because we are coming from different contexts. I am just going to do this to you again because after this I'm going to go into why Wellcome has come into this space. I'm going to ask you to describe the most positive research cultures you've witnessed, just how you think about them, what you've noticed about them. Could be one word. Rare. Well, would I be without a job if they were common? Possibly, and that would be fine. I will work out a way of sharing these with the organisers, actually, because it's really nice to see this range of answers. Collegial, open, supportive, honest. Supportive is definitely staying in the centre there. That captures quite a lot. You might be able to guess what I'm going to ask next. Thank you. So, just before I finish up with this, I'm going to ask you this. Sometimes we like to stay positive, but we end up sometimes being driven by the challenges. Egos. Silos. Bad for outsiders. Hierarchical. Competitive. Totally science-focused. Poaching of ideas. Toxic. Now, bullying is now coming up quite big. I'll wait till we get to 70 or so. Selfish. Closed. And power. Yeah. Thank you for indulging me here. I know that was actually quite a few mentees to do in a row, but I think it's nice to get a sense if we're on the same page. I sometimes wonder if we are dealing with the same things or not, and I'm consistently surprised that we usually are. So I guess one of the reasons Wellcome ends up being invited to events like this is leading up to the pandemic, though we didn't know it at the time, and I wasn't there at the time. Wellcome did a big campaign, a large piece of work that involved a lot of research about the experiences of researchers. I think there was a sense of understanding that something was not quite right in research environments, that researchers were not necessarily happy in their work. And this campaign ended up being quite influential, at least in a UK context, raising the profile of the impact of poor research cultures on people, on research, and on society. And so I'm showing this, illustrate this word cloud as a sort of comparison to what you've just been doing. This was the one that came from that report that was published in 2020, words that researchers use to describe their research culture. Competitive comes up quite big. You could say maybe competition is sometimes good, but we've also got pressured, insecure, elitist. And the respondents assigned sentiments to the words they gave, so we can be reasonably sure that over half of them were describing negative sentiments. So it was quite a shocking report overall, I would say, just kind of levelling us with this about how common these problems are. One of the highlights sort of statistics was that we've got this incredible, wonderful attachment to the pursuit of research. 84% were proud to work in research, but only under 30% felt secure in pursuing that career. And just to summarise, this there are a whole range of different problems, different areas that you could consider poor research culture to be: unhealthy competition, narrow visions of excellence, bullying, pressure to publish, lack of recognition, long hours culture. This, in a way, is basically the same as also what you've just told me. But there's something interesting about how all these different things are happening, and some of them are sort of unrelated, but there are systemic connections. And where are they coming from? Well, that's sort of the million-dollar question, so to speak. This is the bit of it I'm in, where certainly some of the problems are coming from. But this is based on a talk by Sarah de Rijke that my colleague adapted. But we can see we're not just dealing with one systemic problem, we're dealing with several systems interacting. Our team works on the basis of this assumption and belief that good research culture drives good research. We value people in themselves, but we're also thinking about what produces good research. And this is a sort of diagram that we've sometimes used. It's not an official Wellcome diagram, but it's something that we use within our team to sort of think about the relationship between people and communities and research as a kind of infinite loop where you can sort of try and intervene in people and communities to help with research, but you can also intervene in how research is done to try and improve practice in communities. And so it goes on, but it's not that simple. It depends which aspect of people and communities you're talking about. And just to give that little ray of hope, here's what we could imagine a really positive and inclusive research culture involves. And some of those responses earlier on suggest to me that you have seen some of these cultures. They do exist. When I did a PhD, I was in social studies of science, and all my work was interviewing researchers about openness, actually, but they ended up talking to me about their research cultures. And the thing I saw was diversity. There was a huge range from the most open, generous cultures that were deliberately kind of mentored into younger researchers, and the most toxic ones as well. So this might be what you actually wanted to hear. What's Wellcome doing? These are some of the ways in which people in my team have conceived of what we can do. So Wellcome in some way is a funder. We have a lot of influence, but we're also in some ways peripheral because we don't always have direct contact with research communities. But what are our levers of change? Money is a fairly obvious one. Wellcome is obviously a very wealthy organisation, can run funding schemes. So we have the institutional funding for research culture. That's one direct way we could fund research culture directly. We can also influence the way our other funding schemes work and think about the conditions that researchers go through when they're applying to and receiving that funding. We can think about the values that we project, for example, through our bullying and harassment policy, through our EDI policies, and we can think about our overall influence within the research ecosystem. Sorry, I might need some water. In terms of where we collaborate with other funders, with institutions, with researchers, DORA, COARA, collaborations. And here are some examples. More recently, in our discovery research teams, there's been a sort of trend towards funding for longer time periods, thinking about addressing that sort of short-termism within research and insecure contracts, obviously not a solved problem. In our own application processes, we include an emphasis on research environment and culture. We ask researchers to answer about how they're going to work within their own sphere of influence to improve research culture. And we include elements of the narrative CV in application forms. We support the 10 days for career development per year, the CORDAT associated conditions. We have policies for bullying and harassment and open research that we try to push forward. We have a commitment to EDI that is at the level of our own staff, at the level of researchers we fund, and also at the level of the types of research we fund. And we have a team, an EDI team that's actually separate to my team, and we work with them, but they're both significant forces within Wellcome. As well as that, and kind of overlapping with that, we have some anti-racism activities and funding, particularly after 2020, and we have the institutional funding for research culture. Before I get to that last point, I'm just going to mention some work that my colleague Faith has done. So for example, we were thinking, how do we support minoritized researchers to apply for Wellcome funds? And we went through a process where initially, is it pre-application advice? What's the best way to go about this? And through really thinking through the problem, my colleague ended up with an approach of, let's engage first and try to understand what is going on in some of these minoritized communities, because we know that Black people in the UK context are underrepresented, including in our funding portfolio. And so they have set up their own organisations, particularly following George Floyd, to provide support to each other. So trying to understand how those organisations exist, what support they need to exist, where they want to be in the future. That's something that my colleague has been working on. And then we develop support from that point to try and develop something that's going to be meaningful. And then I'm going to focus on the IFRC, the Institutional Funding for Research Culture. Apologies, my voice is a bit weird. This is something that happens to me when speaking. Sometimes I'm not actually nervous. So some of you will have an intimate familiarity with this scheme. Others may not know so much about it, so I'm going to give you an introduction. So the institutional funding for research culture that Wellcome has run was a closed funding call, and it was based on a Wellcome strategic remit. So 42 institutions in the UK and Republic of Ireland were invited to apply on the identified based on whether they had received significant Wellcome funding in the past. You could critique this model. It was based on identifying where Wellcome strategically focused research takes place. Obviously, would love to focus on a broader remit. The funding was to enable, at an institutional level, teams to develop thoughtful and transformative ideas to enhance their research cultures. And the funding was for up to 1 million over 2 years to an institution. So we have 24 awards. 3 of them are sort of part of one collaborative project. And 3 of those institutional awards are in Ireland, in Northern Ireland and Republic of Ireland. I really hope I've got that correct. So what were the applicants asked to do? They're asked to put forward their vision that advances an inclusive, equitable, open, engaged and ethical research, or areas thereof. That sort of aligns with the focus of our team. They were asked to identify a specific challenge in their context. I think that one is quite important, and the solutions the grant could enable. And it was an opportunity to really experiment with new approaches, to maybe do something that wouldn't be possible in their context otherwise. And it was encouraged to be a pilot or proof of concept with potential to scale up and evaluation. And the evaluation bit was quite important because, for example, I think a recent UKRI report has shown that evaluation is sometimes the stage that's missing in research culture interventions. Often, because there's just not the resourcing to do it, there's just not the timeline to do it. So this is an opportunity for us to have some evidence from those interventions. And the evaluation criteria were somewhat aligned to this. So it was important the way the challenge or barrier was identified and whether there was capacity to overcome it. The possible for long-term sort of broad impact while acknowledging the contextual nature of this. Including a good evaluation stage, the methodology of that. It was also really important that there was commitment from the institution to kind of uphold and value that work that was being done. So that's one of the reasons why someone pretty high up in the university had to be the applying lead applicant. And then team skills and experience were obviously also important. How are the applications reviewed? I'm mentioning this because it was a slightly new thing for Wellcome to do. We did have an expert committee with internal and external members, which is quite normal for Wellcome. But then we had a partially randomized element. So instead of creating a full ranking, they were clustered into gold, silver, and bronze categories, where gold is sort of outstanding, definitely should fund. Silver is the biggest group, which is great, wonderful, fundable proposals, and bronze is sort of not quite reaching the threshold. So we randomized within the silver group through a lottery that was an algorithm. And that was the eventual outcome it led to. And if you follow this link, you can read more in an article about how it all worked. So the reason, I guess, Wellcome was able to be convinced to adopt this sort of approach, which is innovative, which is sometimes spoken about in a research culture context, is because with this particular project, you know, the contexts are so diverse, the areas of research culture being explored, it's certainly not possible to be entirely meritocratic about how you rank these. So we wanted to take a bit of the bias out through partial randomization. And these 22 titles here with the institutions are the awards that were eventually selected. And you can, again, there's a link there if you want to go and check out on the Wellcome website the abstracts of those. And I've highlighted there the ones that are in Ireland. And here are the Irish projects in more detail. I think we're going to hear about this after me, so looking forward to that. And congratulations to those institutions who are also working in partnership. It should be pointed out, some of them. So before I finish up with this little intro, I just wanted to mention what we think about the context of IFRC and these awards, like what was the point of doing this kind of funding? What do we hope will come out of it? And there's a big community element to what we hope will come out. So we know that research culture is systemic and sector level, and that it's contextually varied, not just across institutions, but within institutions. So we definitely see the IFRC projects are opportunities for institutions to make specific funded and evaluated interventions that will improve their own research cultures and improve life for research communities at those institutions. That's certainly our sort of basic hope from the scheme, but we really hope it will also drive sector-level opportunities for change, coming together to share best practice, share evidence, and create settings for community-level, community-led action and some momentum towards some of the sector-level changes that might be needed. To that end, we are organising a sort of slightly more expanded community from the original, from the awarded applicants. So we have 24 successful institutions, but we had 42 who applied. And that includes also National University of Ireland, Galway, and Trinity College Dublin. So there are 5 overall who applied to this scheme, and all are doing important work, as well as institutions outside these. Most institutions have some great research culture work going on. So we wanted to kind of expand the community where we're sharing knowledge. We made the maybe slightly strange decision to include everyone on this grant scheme in a community if they wanted to participate. We got in touch with them. They did want to participate. So now we're planning quite a big event in June. I wanted to mention a bit about this because it's about communities generally, and this is also a community. So one of the things we did was had conversations with all the institutions about what they would want from a community. Do they want one? You know, is it a burden? Does it add something? And we got some outcomes from that we're using to kind of co-create what will happen in the community. We've also commissioned an embedded social research team for this community. They will sort of interact with all the members of the teams, be at the events, and they'll be there to sort of help bring together what the collective knowledge of the community is and to share it as widely as possible beyond, because we know this is still a closed community, so it's still not as expansive as it could be. The things that we heard, and I mentioned this because I think it might be quite common to research culture communities more broadly, are people wanted to build and maintain connections. They wanted to build momentum and harness collective energy to push for sector-wide change. They wanted to bring together a critical mass of skills, share knowledge and ways of working and findings, to map the landscape of individuals and groups working on research culture, finding commonalities and divergences, and to grow a robust evidence base. They also had concerns, as you would expect, which we've been paying attention to. So there's a lot going on in the research culture space. So we were thinking about how we could avoid duplication of existing efforts. People were also concerned about trust. When institutions come together, sometimes there's a competitive vibe. Sometimes there's really not. and to try and set the tone in the way we would like was important. Recognising that institutions have different levels of resource and time commitments and how to work with that is really important. Some people were worried about getting stuck in talk, in policy-to-policy conversations, with not enough feeling of action and discussion of action. And we were also thinking about knowing research culture problems. If you get together a group of people who come from research cultures, inevitably you have to assume some of the same problems are going to reoccur: hierarchies, inequities, lack of diversity. So thinking about how we could do that differently, or at least be aware that that might be a pattern, was important. And then, yes, I think as I've mentioned, there was a desire to sustain positive momentum, but people don't necessarily have the time. So how can we support people to take that action? And then I wanted to connect this with the wider sector, because obviously this community I'm talking about there is just one example of many. And that's why I'm sort of delighted to be here at the launch of the All Ireland Research Culture Network, which is another community like this, and it links these communities. And I think what would be really nice is if we can sort of join those dots, be open between the communities, enable the community that we're directly convening to share knowledge more widely, and to, I think that will help with driving sector level change. So that's something that we're still figuring out, quite obviously, so please know that we're open to feedback on this, and we want, if you hear us talking about our community, we want it, the boundaries around it are only really for practical reasons. We want to try and be open with the knowledge that comes out of it. So this is my final slide. What we hope will come out of IFRC and the wider communities. Just to summarise, we do think it's incredibly valuable just what the institutions can achieve themselves through thoughtful, brave, transformative, and quite different projects that have a real potential to improve people's well-being and their research, just as a reminder that this actually does affect people on a day-to-day basis. Even small improvements can really affect people. We want to learn from the collective, not just from each individual project, what works and doesn't work for research culture interventions, taking into account context from different settings. So we want to be able to offer more evidence and tell compelling stories about the connection between good research culture and good research, because those stories still need to be told, and sometimes there's a feeling that there is a lack of evidence. We'd like to see more collaborations between institutions and more coordination in the sector, and to figure out what we can do to help with that. And a sense of moving from talk to action. And finally, this is also a learning exercise for us. We are very much learning as we go along at Wellcome, so we will be including sort of evaluation and feedback on what is the effect of funding research culture in this way, what have been the negative outcomes, what have been the positive outcomes, what could we do in the future, and then also at the community convening level, what could we do better? Should we continue to convene communities? Should we step back and let other communities take hold? Are there different ways of supporting communities? That's all up for discussion. So I've got one more mentee to finish for you, which is, what are your hopes for advancing research culture in Ireland? Given that this is the launch of the All Ireland Research Culture Network, I'm just wondering if anyone wants to reflect on whether there are similar hopes, or maybe there are completely different hopes that some people have for coming together in a community like this. You can do slightly longer responses to this one. Hi. That's great. More funding. So this is the last slide I have up, and I'm happy to move into Q&A after this, but I'll just leave this one open for you to continue adding if you'd like. These are wonderful contributions again, and again I will look to share these with the organisers so we can keep a record. Yeah. Okay, wonderful. I'm just going to, that's still open for anyone who wants to continue adding. But I'll just put up my final slide, and my email address is there if anyone would like to get in touch.
Exciting talk, I think, and already with those responses to Ros's last poll there, I think that's a really good start to our network. So I was enthusiastic at the beginning of the day, and even more enthusiastic now, so thanks so much. I think we've time for a few questions, and of course Ros will be part of our panel discussions later this afternoon as well. But I'll invite questions from the audience now, and if not, I will help certainly. Somebody at the back there, yes. I'm not sure if we've got roving microphones. We have? Yes, we have. Maybe let us know who you are if you wish to.
Hiya, my name is Hilary. I'm from Munster Technological University. I have to first say that I'm relatively new to the world of academia, so I have to preface that in some of the questions, because sometimes I ask questions that everybody's going, why did she ask that? But this instance is just, I'm just curious about the approach you took initially to this, that you selected or you opened the invitation to those that are already really, really successful in research, evidently, because they're significant funding from the Wellcome Trust. So is it that you sort of looked at that and went, well, we'll go with those because they're obviously the leaders, and then we'll, see how we develop with the other people that are maybe less developed in terms of research culture? Was that the logic, or just curious as to how that process worked? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a really important question, and it's a question we've got before. So I personally agree with the question. I think so. There are strategic reasons why it came out that way. I guess one of them is that Wellcome has an overarching strategy focusing on supporting human health research, which is obviously not a kind of equitable coverage of all research environments that we want to improve, and also research cultures are collective and don't necessarily operate at that level of what's the focus of the institution. But that is, in terms of the way Wellcome works as an organisation strategically, that sort of thing shapes what we can get through as a funding scheme. It's also probably shaped by the fact that it is a familiar form of funding, a kind of institutional funding for a sort of set group of universities that Wellcome supports was a type of funding before this. So it was kind of building on that. The scheme was already, the design of the scheme was already in place when I arrived, so I didn't see all the stages. But I think the idea was to experiment with something, put some money into research culture, and yes, it is at institutions, some of them who will be quite advanced in their thinking about research culture, but it's still a relatively diverse set of institutions in terms of their size and type of institution. So there is some diversity to learn from there, and I think the key will be that we will learn from this and think about, if we did another scheme in the future, would it be open applications? How would we kind of manage the volume there so that we don't disappoint too many people and put people to a lot of effort? So absolutely open to any feedback and ideas, especially including through this 2 years of funding. Thanks.
Thanks, Ross. And of course, you know, any funders in the audience, we'd be delighted if other funders as well as Wellcome were to have some support in this area as well. Another question at the other side of the back there.
Thank you very much, Ros. Joanna Archibald from Atlantic Technological University. I know we have a track later on around research assessment, so my question to you is, is the longer term view on this in terms of totally embedding the idea and importance and value we put on research culture, is it that potentially in individual applications for funding that funders might actually potentially have a straightforward go, how have you in your past contributed to research culture, and potentially mark on that to kind of put that value on it? Or is it even when the institution is applying, say as a principal investigator funding or something like that, that the research environment piece has a specific category that talks about research culture? Is that the kind of long term as one of the routes to embed this, or do you think that's the wrong direction? Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, this is absolutely one of the directions. It was actually one of the things that was in place when I arrived in the team, is a question about research culture specifically had been added into the application form, certainly the main discovery research open mode schemes. So all researchers now, and for a period of time before this as well, have been asked when applying for our schemes how they're going to foster a positive and inclusive research culture. And it could be sort of forward orientated, but also explaining differences they've made in the past. This is, I think it's important, it's especially important for signalling that we do value this and it does get assessed and it does get specifically discussed by committees. We also have to acknowledge that it's very difficult to evidence that. We might need to develop in terms of how we follow up on that. I think it's important we're not sort of punitive or that we support it in a way that is itself supportive. But we also recognise that people can be very good with words about research culture, but not good in practice. So that's one of the big challenges. I think it's still important to do nonetheless.
And we have a question from Kate Robson-Rouse. UCD.
Hi, yeah, thanks. Kate Robson-Brown from UCD. We talk about research as if it was happening only within research institutions, universities, but for many of us, there's a very porous interface there between research happening in universities and our industrial partners, including within the Wellcome remit. I wonder if you've got any comments around that?
I think that's just an incredibly important point. And sort of recognising the diversity of institutions that are involved and the fact that sometimes we're not just talking about research culture, we're talking about organisational culture generally and how the different roles, I mean, obviously the way different roles are awarded, the different career paths that exist within different types of institution and across different types of institution is a research culture challenge. So I think probably Wellcome needs to improve its understanding of where research happens and understand more the way different institutions work and how best to support different types of institutions. But yeah, I would just agree with your comment.
Hi, I'm going to take advantage of the microphone's right beside me here. So I'm David O'Connell from University College Cork, and it's actually, apologies, it's a very specific question actually about the review process for the IFRC programme and the partial randomisation and that lottery aspect to the review process. It's just actually the feedback on that, how was it received? Is it something you might be thinking? I understand why you're introduced it, because the diversity of applications would be very hard to maybe compare them and rank them in a kind of simplistic way. But it's a very interesting, I suppose, new direction for review of these type of awards, and is it something that's going to be introduced maybe more widely across other Wellcome programs? Thank
you. Yeah, really interesting question again. I wasn't there when the decision was made to try that model, but it is a often discussed model in terms of trying to take out some of the bias, recognising that it can be quite a small effect within systems that appear to be meritocratic but aren't. I don't know if we've had a lot of specific feedback on the experiences from people within the scheme. So if anyone does have feedback on what it felt like to be part of that scheme, I would be interested. I think people might, I think it was much easier to do that in a scheme like this than it would be in one of Wellcome's other schemes, but it still serves as evidence. So one of the things we might try to do through the community, which includes obviously the people who weren't funded, is to have our embedded social research team talk to people and think about what kind of experience it was for them, whether it helped, whether we got an overall diverse set of applications because of it. But yeah, feel free to tell me your feedback.
We are really hanging on to the microphone down here. I'm Brendan Jennings from TU Dublin. I'm just wondering whether how you see all of the work that funders and institutions are doing to promote a culture of open research interplays with the broader research culture agenda.
Yes, great question. And also kind of a favourite question of mine because my PhD was on openness in research. I think there's a really important interaction, and I was very pleased when I started at Wellcome that the open research team is part of the same team that includes research culture, and I think in some other groupings you could consider them all to be part of one another. I think we still, I can't give another funder perspective on this probably, but I think in Wellcome we still, even though we work beside each other, we're often pursuing different kinds of projects, and there's more opportunity for crosstalk there. But I would say, kind of conceptually, the two are completely, in the infinite loop diagram, I'd say that the two are completely overlapping. To me, what I saw in my research was that quite often it was, there was certainly a correlation. The research groups that had very open practices, whether that's open access and open data, or just how they speak about their research to one another, how collaborative they are. The openness of that seemed to also align with the general positive culture within their groups, and how that causality works. I would say there's a lot of beginning with a very positive, inclusive culture and then being able to be open, because the kind of risks of being open are easier to manage if you have a support around you, because there are certainly perceived risks of being more open with your research. And I think that's my position, that if we could support people to be in a really safe position, then they would be able to be more open and generous with their work. But I think it goes the other way too. There's got to be a sort of something to nudge people towards open practices.
Anybody want to rest the microphone?
Thank you ever so much for us. This is Kate Guccioni from the University of Glasgow. I was just thinking about you saying that you had asked within those funded projects that you had on that's the top of your wheel that I'm miming there, a commitment to research culture, and that was part of the funding process. So with thinking about the design of metrics and ways to measure cultural progress, is there any learning that's come from those in how they've been evaluated, how those projects have been monitored for that commitment that they were funded on? Is that coming true, and is there any learning that we can take from that?
Excellent question. Do you mean in terms of the way people have answered that question in the application forms and what they've subsequently gone on to do?
More they've subsequently gone on to do. Did they do what they said, and how did it go?
Yes. So I have to say we don't know. It is still relatively recent that we've introduced that question, but I think it's probably an active area to consider how we would go about following up on that. I also think just sort of understanding the range of ways people have answered that question, and if there are certain correlations in how people have answered it. We know that people who have lots of dedicated research office support in submitting an application will probably have develop almost like a sense of insider guidance on how to answer those questions. So it's a really, really good question, and I would love to discuss how you think that follow-up would work.
Sorry. Yeah, it's contagious when the mic comes next to you. Rachel Cowan from the University of Manchester. One thing I've always wondered is if the funders, and you could speak on behalf of Wellcome, could have exit interviews for researchers you've funded, and then that would almost like triangulate what was put in the original submission around the institutional support, but then what was the reality of the experience?
Really great idea. Yeah, I like it. I mean, sometimes have an idea like this and it immediately becomes evident that it's impossible to organisationally accomplish. But I think it's a great idea, whether it's a sort of part way, whether it would be important to have that conversation part way through to intercept any sort of particular problems, or whether having it at the end would be most meaningful. I think there's something about the fact that grant funding is given on trust at the point of being awarded that we don't, I suppose in the structures of a funder, we don't have that many structures that are about ongoing monitoring that are sort of meaningful and in-depth. But in the research culture context, I think it is important. I think the challenge for me is also about if there is negative feedback, how do you... I mean, I found that moving from being a social researcher to working at a funder, people don't talk to you in the same way. It's very difficult to get an honest sense of what people's experience has been without them worrying that there will be some implications to that, speaking to a funder. So I think we have that sort of trust issue to negotiate as well.
Thanks. Yes, from the EPA side of things, as a funder, one of the, I suppose, tools that's used is completing an end-of-project questionnaire on completion of the research, which then provides us with possible future research ideas to fill future knowledge gaps. But it also gives an opportunity to see how your research may have leveraged further EPA or European or other international funding. So those, as you say, exit interview type things are really, really informative, to inform indicators for future advancement in terms of funding the research. And then in a sense of, like from the EPA side of things, we have biannual either mid-term reviews of the research to ensure that the project is on track, and key steering committee members from, for example, as the EPA research is very much aligned to policy, we'd have a number of key stakeholders from the policy area to, that can provide support and advice to the researchers on their research journey. So again, closing that loop. But just from, I don't want to hog the mic because everybody who knows me knows I never shut up. But no, I guess I think to always be mindful that a culture takes a very, very long time to evolve and to become, and there is a lot of converging factors in this kind of ecosystem of knowledge transfer and research. So I think patience, is going to be key. Thanks.
Thank you. That's a really apt comment. Yeah, there are reporting stages with our grants, but I think my question is about what do we accomplish with those currently? And I totally agree with the time, how long it takes.
Thanks, Grace, and thanks, Rosalind, as well. Rosalind, just want to get your thoughts on principal investigator engagement around research culture.
Powerful but effective and effective question. Really important. I think, from my own research, I think it's incredibly important in the sense that the culture often takes place at that level, under the influence of that principal investigator, and the effects can be incredibly positive and incredibly negative. We often focus on early career researchers as a way to try and influence culture, as people begin in their careers. But I think there are some things that as people move into those roles happen anyway, even if they've been really immersed in the messages of positive culture before that point. So, your question is engaging principal investigators. I think that's a really hard one. And actually at Wellcome, we're somewhat distanced in a way from day-to-day interaction with researchers. But we do have a role such that people could potentially listen to us because they are the lead applicants on grants. So, we have things like policies, bullying and harassment policies that do apply directly to the lead applicants that hold grants with us. But, I don't feel like I have a good answer to your question. I just think that it's an incredibly important thing, and I would love to have more discussions about the way, yeah.
From my perspective, I think it's a critical strain around research culture because I suppose the influence
consistency of approach. It can't just be bottom up. It has to also be top down. And I guess the challenge we have is ensuring that PIs understand their roles as mentors, developers, and people managers in shaping that culture. So I think that's, I suppose, the nub of my comment really, I suppose, focuses on that.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think, and there's a lot of commentary about how there's a lack of training and people don't understand their role. I sort of feel like there's a role for sort of educating and informing and supporting at that stage, but there are other problems, I think, where you have very prevalent bullying and harassment, for example. I don't think that's just a problem of people not knowing management skills in their lab. I think you sort of need to maybe intervene earlier or in different ways, or to sort of shape the environment differently so that pressure is taken off those pressure points. Those research groups are often quite isolated, and I think maybe the isolated nature of them contributes to how those problems develop.
We have another question down here.
Thanks, Rosalind. Very interesting conversation. My name is Gordon Cook from TU Dublin. Just on the back of all of that conversation then, you know, for change to occur, risk needs to be taken. Do you think that the funders are being brave enough to take risks with their proposals and so on?
Do you mean proposals for how we fund? Are you talking about large-scale changes to how we?
That they're pushing out. Are they taking enough risks to bring in more people and more diversity?
Really, yeah. Again, great questions. I mean, brave is one of Wellcome's new corporate values. So I think Wellcome is quite well positioned to take risks in the way that we fund, in funding research culture directly, in putting research culture questions into grants, in, you know, restructuring schemes to make it possible to have a longer duration of grants. So I think, at least for my organisations that I can speak for, there are a lot of people who have a lot of appetite to do risky things, knowing that this is an incredibly important area. I think we're still a risk-conscious organisation, though, and that does affect things. So I would just say that funders are complex internally, I guess, and trying to being part of a community like this, for example, is important for me, for people in my kind of role, because we can think about how we work within our own organisations to support those risky actions that could lead to real progress.
Okay, I think we're going to have to move on. Ros is here all day though, and so do buttonhole her during the lunch break, the coffee breaks, etc., etc. And of course, as part of the Wellcome IFRC community and our own Research Culture Network, we hope this will not be the last time, Ros, that you and your colleagues come to talk to us. So thank you so much again.
Thank you.